Welcome to the Teacher's Pep Rally. If you missed our last episode, we shared sweet stories and insight with Wendy Garman, our favorite lunch lady, and her elementary school students. Please go back and check it out. And while you're there, leave us a review. We value you and these conversations. Our guest today is an assistant professor at the University of Northern Colorado, where he directs the Gaming SEL Lab. His passion and research merge between game-based learning and social and emotional learning. We love that he studies how playing and making games can cultivate empathy, perspective taking, and ethical decision making. He has been invited to the White House, can't wait to hear about that, authored several books and papers, and is a frequent collaborator with UNESCO. Grab a seat on our comfy bleachers, and please welcome to the Teacher's Pep Rally, Dr. Matthew Farber.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo!
Thank you. Actually, I'm an associate professor.
Associate professor.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Welcome.
That's awesome.
Recent tenure.
There you go. Congratulations.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Wonderful. We celebrate you. That's fantastic. Well, we're so excited to have you here. We've started something a little bit new this year. Letitia's going to talk about just a nice little kind of way to get the conversation going and celebrate things. So Letitia, you want to tell us about it before we go?
Absolutely. So to our new listeners and our repeat offenders, if you will, we have started doing something called Happy Happenings, where, Matt, we just really become very intentional about looking for things that are going on great in our lives, either through happenstance or that we actually create a happy happening for someone. So we go around and we kind of just share something awesome that happened during the week. And so I hear you just got tenure, so I would assume that's a happy happening for you. But we'll give you a little time to cook up a happy happening. Pete, why don't you start us off tonight with your happy happening?
We're on fall break. Doesn't get better than that.
Drop the mic. Boom.
That's it.
That's it.
When we have a little room to breathe, I like getting reconnected with the creativity and all those other good things. I've been stressing a little bit on what's the big show at my homeschool this year. What are we going to do? And I've really had a hard time finding the right show for the right kids for the right time. And that was my goal this week, was to find the show and then figure out our angle. You know, we do our version of shows. So sometimes we're outside under the stars on the playground at night, or we're doing an original, or we're doing a rock musical, or we're doing this and that. And so, yeah, I came up with it. It hit me yesterday, and I'm super excited, and I'm excited about our angle and our way we're doing it. Now we got to get the school to approve. I got the families excited about it. So that was my big thing, is like a huge thing taken off. And it's because I had some time to breathe this week. So
awesome.
Yep.
That's an awesome happy happening. Thank you for sharing.
I'll tell you what it is later.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Add
Reveal,
suspense.
maybe? Little reveal.
Little reveal.
I love it. I love it. Erin, what was your happy happening this week?
Well, I guess it'll tag nicely with Pete. So here in Georgia, it's starting to feel like fall a little bit, which is nice. So during fall break, and I have been intentionally coming home from work and changing into some workout clothes and just going outside and going for long walks. And the wind is blowing through the trees, and the sky is blue, and I get to just kind of let go of the day and just enjoy the weather. So that's my happy happening. It's just the little things.
That's great.
I love that. I love that. And I love that you guys both share kind of self-care in nature, right? Because happy happenings help us with our emotional part of ourselves. So I love that you guys had that experience this week. Fred, what you got for us?
So the saga is evolving. Everybody that's been listening, or you all know, I know, and Matt, you might not know. So I had Achilles surgery in July, and so I was out of the boot in the classroom today. So that was a big step forward, literally.
Pun intended.
Pun intended.
Pun intended.
Yes. And it was one of those moments where, I was it was like walking on eggs a little bit. It's like one of those things. I did have a sneaker on, but it was one of those moments where I had physical therapy yesterday, and my physical therapist, who he and I go way back, he's like, well, you know what, if you're not on uneven ground, why don't you take it off in the classroom? So I did. And the thing that was funny about it, this is the real joyful moment, was the students' reactions. They were pretty cool about it. They're like, it's awesome, he's out of his boot,
I love
so
it.
all my college students are like praising me out of my boot, I guess. I don't know. But it felt good to be kind of back on 2 feet, so to speak, and then kind of moving around. So that was a good movement. Good step. Like I said, good step forward. So
good. And I love the pun. Thank you, sir. Laughter is great for the soul. Matt, what you got for us?
Well, let's see. It's still early in the week, so I would say, yeah. So, I had an interesting aha moment. I guess something that it never even like crossed my mind. But I teach ed tech courses, and I teach literacy courses, and I teach pre-service educational technology across content areas. So in the pre-service course, I do this. This is very layered and nuanced. It took a while to get to this point, and I feel like I should write it up somewhere. But I had them play Shark Tank, right? And in their content areas and groups, they research an ed tech tool. I curate a list, so it's it's good, right? Better ones, right?
right.
And they're in different areas. And the social studies teachers, like 3 or 4 groups, all decided to. And this is also to teach the components of project-based learning. They have a reflection, they write a driving question. So it's like they're doing project-based learning and learning about it and all that sort of thing. And they pitched it to the dean. So the dean was happy to come along.
Oh, that's cool.
Because I needed that authentic audience. And, why not level it up, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And then, so 3 of the groups did Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour. And if you're not familiar with it, it's like the museum basically of the game. So it's like rated E. It's like you can actually get the Egypt version for free soon. And the other 2 versions are part of like this $20 or $15, something like that, where you put on a computer and it's like, you just walk through the virtual world and there's lessons in it and stuff like that. And I have a friend of mine at McGill University who did the curriculum, and several of the groups did it. And I just was talking to them, and they told me that the reason they did that was because they all play Assassin's Creed. And it's not like you're like a stereotype gamer at all. It's just across the board. And it turns out that's why a lot of them got into history and majored in social studies and are now becoming teachers.
Wow.
Assassin's Creed has been around for 15 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's right. It's the anniversary this year, isn't it? It's an anniversary release. Yeah.
And I felt old. Like I started playing Assassin's Creed 2 when that was out. Right. And I'm like, I always felt like, well, that's great for classrooms. I used to teach social studies. So Assassin's Creed 3 was like my best friend, at the time, because it was an American Revolution. And it never occurred to me or dawned to me, like a generation basically was raised on these interactive games where history comes alive. And to them, that's what really sparked their interest in history.
That's really cool.
That was really like, whoa, like
That's very
I felt old and inspired at the same time.
Which is great, right?
Yeah.
To still be inspired.
Right? Like, I don't know. I feel like some of these things are new, but they've been around, like podcasting, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, remember Audacity?
Oh, yeah.
Now that's like a virus, I think. Like I remember reading, like, don't download Audacity. It's spyware or something.
Right.
I love it. Well, that's a great happy happening. Thank you so much for sharing. And as we were talking about gaming, I was like, oh man, I remember ColecoVision. So now I'm dating myself with ColecoVision.
Pitfall.
Yeah. I love it.
Seemed cool, the commercials.
Yeah. I had to share it, which wasn't cool, but maybe that's why we needed you, Matt. I had a hard time sharing. So my happy happening this week is professional and personal. Professional, I just joined the Peabody practice as a therapist, so I'm super excited.
Hey, congratulations!
That.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Whole nother scope of serving and bringing mental health awareness to a whole nother community and socioeconomic group and all that good stuff. So happy about that. And then on a personal note, of course, my heart goes out to all in Puerto Rico and Florida, but my daughter came home with the grandbaby because they're in Florida. And so I have had a chance to learn about all of these little baby sharks and all these games and goldfish everywhere. I'm very out of touch with this stuff.
Whole world.
Yeah, it's a whole new world, but she loves the phone. I tell you, she loves the phone. So that's, at what, 18 months, she's just like with her device, so watch out for our devices. But anyway, those are my happy happenings. Thank you guys so much for sharing yours. And I want to encourage our listeners to share their happy happenings with us on our Facebook page, Teacher Pet Rally, and also try this at home. Maybe it's a great way to unwind and connect at the end of the day for families. Erin, thank you so much for kicking us off today.
Yeah. All right. Well, Matt, you kind of hinted a little bit, your happy happenings tied in nicely to why you're here to talk to us. And my first thought is we have a good understanding, especially Fred, of game-based learning, but can you give us a little bit of a definition and maybe some examples of how we might see game-based learning in the classroom?
You want me to talk for the whole hour?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Bring your PowerPoint presentation.
Just ask my wife. I could talk for years on this.
That's okay.
Wow. So yeah, I guess I would say so first of all, let me preface this all. I am not like the record store snob or like the bookstore snob, like you're reading that, right? Like anytime an educator is bringing play into a classroom, it's a win. So I don't like to rank games and say like, well, I don't know, Classroom Jeopardy or like Kahoot. That's not what we're talking about. It's got to be like this type of game. By no means do I ever think that, right? So game-based learning to me is again founded on play and play theory. So play is what happens in the constraints and the structure of a game. And a good game should be what Professor Tracy Fullerton at USC calls play-centric. So it should give you enough room to play, but there are all sorts of ways to play. And I don't know, I guess my foray into game-based learning was when I taught social studies and I used iCivics. The game is on the iCivics platform, and I'm still part of the iCivics Educator Network, and I still carry all that stuff with me. I'm still in the Classcraft ambassador. I'm still with different game Brain Pop. I'm still a certified Brain Pop educator. Sure. So there are all sorts of games that are cool in the classroom. If you're playing a game because you're a fast finisher, that sort of thing. Now, I'm also trained through what was known as the Institute of Play, which is now part of Connected Learning Lab at UC Irvine. And they have a school, Quest to Learn, in New York. And it's about like paper-based games and learning how systems work through games. To me, I would say that game-based learning is often, but again, it's hard to define, right? Yeah. When games are the focal point of instruction, right? So games are actually act as play itself. So in the literature of play is what a games play scholar, Brian Sutton Smith, called ambiguous. It depends on the context. So just like play, games are also kind of difficult to define. And I think a problem with some educational learning platforms, I won't call any out, but what they do is, they will look at like play. They look at a definition of play, like feedback, for instance, 3 stars. And then they will put that in their system and say that that's now a game because it met those 5 criteria. But not necessarily, because not all games give you immediate feedback. An exploration game doesn't do that. The feedback, it's like a book. And some games are very much like murder mystery novels, which you can also argue are games, because the writer will give you portions of the story and clues that you then playfully assemble in your mind as you're reading through the text. And then, of course, you're interpreting the text and you're responding to the text. So that is a playful activity as well, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be in a computer. I think an issue often is the word dash-based, because it implies that games are also a playful, fun activity and pedagogy that can assess at the same time. Teachers are the best assessors. We already know that. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, right? We don't all need dashboards. There wasn't a dashboard when Thoreau wrote Walden. It wasn't like
As far as we know.
As far as you know, you don't get 3 stars for transcendentalism, right? The teachers develop that, right? And in the classroom, you can do all sorts of things when you bring games in. I would bring in board games. One example is Werewolf, where you close your eyes and you have to guess who the werewolf is in the circle. Sort of like the card game Mafia. And it's a classic game, and we played it in class in 7th grade. And then I asked them how they felt after they had to lie and bluff about who might be the werewolf because they didn't know. And then I showed them The Crucible, the Arthur Miller text. And this is a 7th grade class, and the Crucibles usually read are like 10th grade or so. And I said, well, how would The Crucible, which is about the Salem witch trials, and they made that cognitive leap that werewolf is like the Salem witch trials and other witch hunts through history, right?
Oh, wow.
And I challenged them to remake Werewolf to be about The Crucible. And I said, well, what would Rebecca Nurse do if she was in the game, in your game? And they remapped the characters to the game, and then they play the game. So in that case, the game became like this mediator, like game-based learning. In other contexts, games are a form of media, and this is where a lot of my work's been recently. So looking at games not as something that's on a computer because it's on a computer. Netflix is digital. Most people don't think of Netflix and Disney Plus as technology. Most people who say they're terrible at technology probably watch streaming services or have an Apple Watch. And those are invisible. Yeah. And those are what we call invisible technologies. We don't think about them as technology anymore. And some games are like that, like narrative games that tell story are like that. Did I freeze?
Nope,
Yeah.
you're good.
You're there.
I can hear you.
Sorry, I froze
Play
on my
games with
screen.
us, Matt.
Yeah, sorry.
Werewolf.
Werewolf. I know. I always play that all the time. Guess who the werewolf is? When you use a game as a text, then it gets very interesting. And some of my work has been pairing books and games together. So you could do that with Werewolf and The Crucible, but you could do that with lots of different games. That one example is Alba, a Wildlife Adventure, which is a beautiful game you can play on an iPad, and you are a young girl living with your grandparents over the summer in a Mediterranean island off the coast of Spain. And you move the device around to take photos of birds and other parts of the ecosystem. And you could hear the birds chirp. And it's a full story, and it's very much like a book. And then you have to collect petition signatures from folks on the island because they want to build a hotel over the ecosystem. So you have to think about, do you want more jobs on that island or the ecosystem? But it's an entertainment game. And that's where we are, I think, with games in the classroom. We need to start bringing in more entertainment games because we're in Dick and Jane territory with a lot of educational games, right?
You're dating me again. That's how I learned how to read.
Right? But then, did you really?
Yes, actually.
Well, because there's an interesting story about, so that game pairs well with like the book Hoot, which is read in classrooms. So you take the game as sort of this virtual social emotional field trip where you can build on perspective taking and then take that meaning making and bring it to the book, because lots of children don't often even get out of the hometown to experience, those sorts of situations, and that can add a layer of depth to reading.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I say Dick and Jane was very entrenched in schools. Dr. Seuss is a great book, by the way, about Dr. Seuss, but called Becoming Dr. Seuss by, I think, Brian J. Jones. Great read. He also wrote a terrific book on Jim Henson. And there's an anecdote that is in the book where Bennett Cerf, who founded Random House, and he was starting, beginner books, was working with Dr. Seuss and gave him the same word list, the age-appropriate word list for Cat in the Hat, for the grade, and said, well, can you make a book out of this limited word list? And that book was, of course, Cat in the Hat. And they also teamed with a educational publisher. And I don't remember it, but maybe it's Houghton Mifflin, but maybe not. But the company's still around. and they were going to have a Cat in the Hat for classrooms, and it was a complete flop. Nobody wanted it. The schools only wanted Dick and Jane because of the testing in the 1950s and 60s and forward. And it took a while. Parents, though, at holiday season, when the book came out, were buying Cat in the Hat. So that was what was read at home.
Huh.
And this is where we are often with games. Games are with pretty deep, nuanced experiences are being played at home. Increasingly with subscription services like Apple Arcade, Game Pass on Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
And then in schools, the games that kids get tend to be dry and bland and Dick and Jane.
So what I'm hearing, Matt, it sounds like the gaming is allowing educators or even families to open up a space to consider what it might be like being placed in some kind of world, some kind of scenario, an opportunity to think of different perspectives, how to handle situations. And you've written books and a lot of articles on these things. Can you maybe give us an example of a game, and then what the students could maybe be considering with those kinds of perspectives?
Absolutely. In fact, I use this term in when I was a classroom teacher. I played this game. It's, there are so many interesting games that were on Flash that you can't play anymore.
Oh yeah,
Right,
I know. They know nobody, and nobody's converting them over. It's crazy. Well,
I know,
I shouldn't say
I know.
nobody, but yeah.
And also, like, the better ones were grant funded, so then those don't have no money. There's no money to update them. And Brain Pop used to host them too, but they're not. They have to be accessible on all devices now. So one of those games was called the Migrant Trail, and it was a work of transmedia storytelling with a documentary called The Undocumented. So you play twice in that game, once as migrants, sort of like the Oregon Trail, but you pick who's going to cross the Sonoran Desert border and with what supplies. Then you play again as border agents, and it's kind of boring and slow on purpose. And then students never realize that border agents mainly are administering first aid, for instance. And these are really difficult decisions. I chatted with a teacher, Angelique Giannis, in San Diego when I was doing research for Gaming SEL, my recent book. And she pairs the game with the book Into the Beautiful North. It takes place in Sinaloa, and children, not children, like teenagers, they go across the border to San Diego, and there's a story there. And she, at a certain point in the book, she then projected the game on the board, and then they played it for 20 minutes and had this conversation about it. When I used it in my classroom, NPR happened to be covering my teaching, and the reporter said that what I was doing was taking my students on what would otherwise be an impossible field trip. And that really resonated with me. And, we think of Ms. Frizzle, right? And these types of
right.
Yes.
right?
The Magic School Bus was a fantastic thing.
I know, right? Was she a good teacher? Was she putting her kids in danger?
She was a little off the rocker, but she's all right.
I know, right? And I think of that today. And I think a really great entry point for bringing games into the classroom is using them as a paired text, not necessarily having kids one-to-one on in this experience. Now you can, of course. Another example is a game and curriculum we developed around it called Bury Me, My Love. Bury Me, My Love is it's an Arabic expression, like you before me, essentially. It's an expression of love from us, usually from a spouse to another spouse. And in the game, you play as Syrian refugees, and the game won several awards, and it looks like WhatsApp for most of the experience. So it's interactive fiction. It's mostly text. It plays in real time. So you are one character and the other is the AI, the spouse. And you can make a decision like, I'm at the border. What do you think I should do? You click on a choice. Then you see the 3 dots, and you could be waiting for quite a while for a response for those 3 dots. With UNESCO, I've been developing curriculum around games. And that particular game, we developed curriculum and we tested it in schools in New Delhi, in India, and in Dubai. And we found in certain groups of students, empathy was actually kind of flat. We also looked at push and pull factors, which is a standard you would teach in social studies, but we found a boost in compassion. And compassion, second step, which is a great curriculum for SEL, they define compassion, empathy rather, as compassion in action. And when you think about what games do, games, the verbs of games are action. You're doing something. And it's interesting that a game can impact that to a person, but we also have to think about the curriculum that wraps it, right? You wouldn't read Into the Beautiful North and then suddenly assume that because you got to the last page that you have compassion for, folks that are forced to migrate through this dangerous Sonoran desert, right? That's where the curriculum comes in. We think, my colleague researchers and I, that games need to be invited into literature circles the same way you would invite in a book. Validate and legitimize children's experiences playing games. Children may or may not play these types of games, but I find that some of them are because of subscription-based services like Game Pass, right? You may play a game that might be, an adventure game, right? Or a Fortnite type of game. But there are many games that are curated by Microsoft, intentionally, I'm sure, to expand. There's different genres, there's different types of books, right? And to bring those into students' experiences, I think is important. I would actually argue, not to use up all the oxygen here, but I would argue that—
Catch your breath, because I'm going to jump in.
Okay, yeah. We've missed a major opportunity to teach film and television as a rhetorical form of media in the 20th century, which was and still is, you could argue, the dominant form of storytelling, right? Documentary film, for instance, really important. We, to an extent, teach how commercials persuade. We teach, to an extent, propaganda, but we don't teach enough about film language uniformly. My son learns it in his school. He has a film class, but I think that's the exception. Video games are the campfire of the 21st century. More people spend money on video games than they do on, I think, books and music combined, some statistic like that. The average age of somebody that plays video games is at least 35 years old and trending higher. Right. And
because we're getting older. Yeah.
We're getting older. And games are getting more nuanced. Games are not like they were in the 1980s. That's like looking at silent film, compared to The Godfather or, movies of today.
Yeah.
Well,
I had so many aha moments today just reading over your material and the things that you've worked on. I actually stumbled across a video on YouTube, 10 scientific studies that prove gaming is beneficial. And it totally changed my perspective just watching that video, right? And what I started to kind of think about, and I wanted to kind of see what your thoughts were, is as a former educator, we're all educators, right? At all times, you're right. My license is still current, but I'm joking, but you're right. But just all of the misconceptions. I just remember even bringing in, for example, when the boards, the smart boards were introduced, and how we were just in a tizzy over these, over these boards, and principals saying, hey, this is not to be projecting movies. This is not like a movie projector, right? We want you to use these games and all this, right? But after today, just reading all your stuff, I just was hoping that you could give us maybe some clarity to debunk a lot of misconceptions, right? That play is so important. I mean, you've done a lot of research and study, right? And so if you could kind of maybe debunk some misconceptions that are out there, because I just feel like creating a common language would just be a great place for us to start.
Sure, happy to. let's see. I guess one of the big ones, I guess, I don't know if it's still so pervasive, is like the stereotype of who plays video games.
Oh, right. Being all boys centric or
yeah. Boy centric and hyper macho and
and you become more violent. You become more violent.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I would point folks to takethis.org, which is a terrific website, and Rachel Cowart does research there. She's I think the lead researcher there, and that's just a terrific organization. But that's definitely a stereotype. Almost if you look at like Entertainment Software Association's research and statistics, almost everybody plays games, like literally almost everybody. And it's about identity. So I often go to conferences, and in class, I'll say, who is a gamer? And only a few hands will go up, very few. And then I say, who has a game on their phone, and show me, and almost every hand will go up.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that identity thing. Now I have an Xbox Game Pass, for research. And a Switch.
That's awesome.
But it
I
is.
like the way you think.
But right, like, I don't know. I mean, I used to collect CDs before Spotify, and I would always think somebody had more music than me, right? That's the real music person, So maybe that's why I never even myself identified as a gamer. I never played like World of Warcraft or like online multiplayer games like that. I'm more of a single player experience. Everybody has their own genres, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, everybody plays games. In my class, I mentioned before we started that I asked students who played Assassin's Creed and Discovery Tour, which is like the museum-based rated E version. So it's really just exploring the virtual world of ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and Norway in the Valhalla period, right? The Vikings. And it was mainly the girls in the class that were playing, and the boys. It was completely across the board. At college campuses, like Dungeons and Dragons, very popular, and it's not just, it's not like the stereotype, right? So that's one thing. The other is games are a highly social activity, particularly during the pandemic. Games are highly social. I know my son would play with his friends in Minecraft. They would play hide and seek. Over Zoom. He would put on Zoom just for the sound, and they would play hide and seek in a Minecraft world because you could do it in the real world. He would play. Well, I guess the most common game at that time was Among Us, and Among Us, right. So you've got elements of werewolf, right? That's that social deduction. Then you have elements of hide and seek and tag.
Wow.
And it's all on a digital device, and it's social. It's very social. The other piece. And I'll take a sip of water before I debunk this one.
Hydrate.
Okay. Roll up the fist. No, I'm just kidding. One other thing before I get to this is that the violence piece, right? There are studies that go back a really long time that debunk a lot of that. Most people play video games. Japan is the country that has more folks that play video games than anywhere else, and they have way lower gun violence. So it's that whole correlation, causation thing, right? And then the studies go like this. Somebody that plays a teenager, let's say, I'm just, quote, it's not an exact quote, but I can't cite this, but I know I've read it. A teenage boy that has played like a shooter game, right after they play the game, they may be a little bit more aggressive, but about a little bit more aggressive as the control group that was playing Sonic and got frustrated playing Sonic the Hedgehog, because you're caught up in a game in a moment. First-person shooter games are not the only type of video game. Also, that's another thing to debunk. Fortnite is very cartoonish, and Fortnite is very much like taking I'm friends with one of the UX designers of Fortnite, and when she made Fortnite, the heads-up display and all these things and the dances that are in there, it's really to take what's popular in school and put it into a game, right? Like outfits and and emotes to other players. Again, it's like tag. Most players look at it as tag. It's interesting to me because you can watch Star Wars, which is rated maybe PG, and you're shooting bad guys that are wearing white uniforms, so you don't think of them as like human damage, right?
Right.
And most games are kind of like cartoonish like that. And again, that's not even the predominant form of games. There are all sorts of different games that are out there. It's like saying all movies are Avengers movies, which can seem like that sometimes, right? And the other thing to debunk is screen time. And suddenly, somehow, after years, screen time became a thing. Now, when I grew up, back in my day, in the 70s, screen time meant television and sitting too close to.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Sitting too close to the screen. I'm sure you've seen that meme that was like, don't sit too close to the screen. And then there's like VR. And like, don't take rides from strangers. And then there's Uber, right? Right. And what does screen time even mean? And we hear things like, well, if you're creating, you're not, that's different than consuming, and consume, like ISTE tends to do that. They put, this like dichotomy of creating and consuming, and that's okay, I think. But, there's a concept called mood management theory, and mood management theory goes back to the mid 1980s, like Zillman, 1988, and before that. I don't know if I need to cite on the podcast here, but and this concept called mood repair strategies, which is a really important aspect of social and emotional learning. Mood repair and mood management takes a bit of self-awareness to do that. Now, what I'm talking about is when you come home from school. I used to come home from school, tired, school, you're on all the time, and I would watch DuckTales because it's awesome, right? But also, it still is, right? I know. And and Darkwing Duck and all that, right?
Disney Afternoon all the way.
That's so great. And but I couldn't watch that all the time, right? After a while, I'd want to watch some other type of drama, let's say. On Netflix, I'll watch the great British baking show.
Oh, it's a great show. New season just started. So
It's great, right? Save my Fridays. I used to go out on Fridays. Now we watch this. But I can't watch that all the time. Although I guess I have binged a few seasons. So fun fact. But I can't watch like just dark British police procedurals all the time. I can't watch a marathon of like Luther episodes. That's just too much, right? And mood management theory means that it's a part of media studies, actually. So an example is that we go to media. Trying to find an example here. So we go to some media, because it makes us feel, quote, mentally occupied or diverted from real world problems, right? And that's what the self-determination folks tell us. So children might play Mario Kart or watch SpongeBob SquarePants, and you could argue that they should, because they need that time to regulate bad moods or negative moods, right? Yeah. And that is important. And to arbitrarily remove screen time and play can kind of be damaging. It should kind of regulate itself out. Now, you can't actually just consume one form of media. That form of media is called hedonic media, which is from the Greek for pleasure, hedonistic. Aristotle talked about another type of media, about virtuous living, which is eudaimonic media. And eudaimonic media creates a deeper sense of well-being beyond hedonic pleasure. If you compare 2001 Space Odyssey or Interstellar or Arrival to Star Wars, that's the difference between hedonic media and eudaimonic media. But we can't just consume one or the other. We need to have balance there, not balance of what's on our screen and time, but balance.
That's the key.
That's the key, right? When you achieve that balance, like my son, we don't have a screen time limit for him. We never have. We didn't give him an iPad till he was 5 because he had no interest in anything but playing, right? Then, some Minecraft and playing on toys, but often drawing, coloring, still doing that, color pencils and art.
Right.
Right. And I think it's because we weren't imposing these like artificial boundaries. He rarely watches television, actually, and that might be generational.
Wow.
He does spend time animating. He uses an app called Flip a Clip, where you're creating cartoons, posting them on YouTube, which then made him want to create a Google site. So he asked me how to do that.
Wow.
And then to manage a community on Discord. And he'll be 12 in a couple of weeks. And that's a whole lot of production, right? I don't want to limit that production, except for bedtime, right? The devices go away and all that. But it's like if you take an agnostic view of screens and think about books, what kind of books are you reading? Are they hedonic books, like you might read on an airplane, maybe? Are they more eudaimomic books, like maybe a biography? Why do we read books or engage with media that makes us feel emotionally uncomfortable? Why do we watch zombie movies or play zombie video games? Why do we engage with media like about the Holocaust? For instance, the new Ken Burns documentary. Why would somebody watch that, right? The reason why is so we can practice. We mentally practice going through these experiences. There are a lot of video games, not a lot, but there are some video games that deal with anxiety, depression, death, grief. And we deal with those because we know at some point we will have to confront them, and it gives us practice. That's why we watch movies that we watch, right? And that's, to me, that is actually all of the theory and foundational research of well-being.
Yeah.
Right. And when you achieve well-being, you can also achieve what is known as human flourishing. And with the researchers at UNESCO, that's what we think the goal of education should be: human flourishing, to help everybody see their full potential, right? And games can be part of that. But so can books and other forms of media, because they allow us to practice with emotions safe from real-world consequences. And play is fundamental
everything
to
you're
learning.
saying, Matt, about gaming, I'm relating to books, because that's, everything you're saying, that's how I feel about books. Fred, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that if you were to take a look, so I have a lot of audiobooks right now because of, commuting and traveling and so on. If you took a look at my audiobook list right now, my Audible list book, right? It's a weird balance. I would love to say that I start a book and finish it. I have actually 3 books started and finished, but they are all of different subject matter, and it's that balance. And I was also going to chime in too. So I teach a terrorism course on top of my technology stack because of my background in the military. And we talk, and that's one of the questions I ask to my class is, do video games cause violence? Now, typically my class is made up predominantly of males, and you could see that I touch a nerve, because I'm also asking them almost like a religious question, because they know society sometimes looks at these games as being violence inducing. So they immediately want to say, no, I'm normal. They don't cause violence. But I have them dig into it a little further. And really what the goal of that exercise is to understand what you're just talking about. And it's a factor. Like the gaming world is a factor in a person's life. It's not the thing that singularly defines them. And if they have other predisposed mental health conditions or other things going on in their lives, if these all kind of come in at the same time, and then these risk factors are all present, then that's the problem. That's the real problem. But that other point you were saying though about the the game and the flourishing aspect of it is, it almost feels like we're still in a society where it's taboo. It still has maybe that's that'll be a generational shift before we see this, or?
Yeah, so those are really great points. Thanks for bringing that up. So there is such thing as, if you're what we call, I guess, unhealthy gaming, it's not always the gaming that's doing that. It's manifesting itself in gaming.
Right.
Or other things. Now, there are, of course, social mores, right? Like, is it, you're watching too many people play, you're playing video games I play sometimes maybe an hour to unwind. I'll play a game, Right. To me, it's like, wow, I played an hour playing a video game. But people watch 6 hours of football on Sundays. They'll put on face paint and dress up.
Yes, and look weird.
and look weird, and that's cool, right? Right. So
love
They'll go
that.
to the stadium. They'll have
I
some
mean,
beverages, and before you know
Yeah.
it, they're seeing the magistrate down on the entry floor.
naked from the waist up, right? They're naked
Yeah.
from the waist up. It's like, and that's
Yeah, so-
normal.
and that's what, yeah. So it's like that social acceptability. Now, when you talk about like, violence in games that could lead to even worse negative consequences, right?
Mhm.
Often at times, I think it's, I would point to the work, this terrific work by the Anti-Defamation League.
Mhm.
And they put out great documentation on technology. That's in my book also. I chatted with one of the folks there. And there's oh, it's escaping me late in the day. But there was a pilot that was put out. I guess if you go to the website gamesforchange.org, it's a terrific pro-social, social impact website. And they have a huge festival every year, Games for Change. Very active with that community. And they've been doing work with the Stevens Institute, and they've been doing work with UC Irvine about player spaces, right? About the like Discord and other online communities that could negatively recruit people into bad spaces, right? So there is work being done there, right? The other piece is, I guess I got in the woods, in the weeds. You said something else after that about
The factors or the taboo. It's a taboo.
the taboo, yeah.
Yeah.
So taboo, right? For a while, and all media has gone through this historically. So in the 1950s, when murder novels, murder mystery novels were starting to become popular, those were also considered taboo. Reading novels themselves were considered taboo. Reading novels, if you were a woman in the late 1800s and early 1900s to probably the mid-century, might have been taboo, right? Comic books were taboo, right?
Wow.
And many people see video games following the trajectory of comic books, or what we now call graphic novels sometimes, which I would say are novels. Audiobooks are books and graphic novels are novels, right? And
all my stack down on the floor.
right? And maybe it wasn't until Scott McCloud wrote Understanding Comics, or maybe it wasn't before that when V for Vendetta, Mouse, won awards.
Persepolis.
Persepolis, great, right? Same with animated features, right? Would you go to? I mean, when I was growing up, I don't know that I would consider going to an animated film something adults would do, right? Some people think that video games are what only children play also, right? But there are rating systems on games. That's where parenting comes in. And the statistics
Imagine that.
Imagine that. And the Entertainment Software Association statistics show and support that most parents, like a really high number, are there making the purchase.
Right.
Right?
So you're there.
You're there, right? So not every game is for children, right? And not every movie is for children either, right? But I think it is the social taboo part, right? It's like comic books. It's like movies. I'm reading a book on film studies now too. And movies were like that too. In the turn of the century, movies were, I write this piece in my book, there was I forgot the name, and it's in French, so I'll butcher the name. But it was just a train. That was it. And early movies had no story. They were just sort of like filming, circus acts, basically, or things.
Right.
And you would go into a tent and you would watch them. And in France in 1895, they thought that train was going to go right through that screen. And some people, taboo, they think video games are still like Pac-Man, right? Or what they see in an arcade. And, that is not like what most video games are. Most video games can tell very deep and nuanced stories. And a lot of them do. And not everybody plays games. I think a nice way might be, I think phones help, but not all games are Candy Crush, I think introducing people to games that are not Candy Crush, like Florence, which is a terrific game. It's a story-based game. You play as a young woman, and you meet this guy, Krish, and you date, and it tells a story on your phone. And it's a heartbreaking story too, by the way.
That sounds like a graphic novel.
It is very much like a graphic novel, yeah. And what games can do very interesting because of player agency, because you make an action and you feel the consequences of that action, is have a different emotional palette than other forms of media. So you can read Les Mis, right? Or you can watch the musical. And it's a very different emotion. If you're reading a text, you have what's called theory of mind, where you get into the narrative thread of the writer in literature. And that can actually boost empathy. So you might feel something for Jean Valjean stealing that loaf of bread. If you're watching the musical or any other adaptation on a screen, you may develop what's called a parasocial connection. And that is, you feel like you're friends with a person, Fred Rogers and Daniel Tiger, very effective at that, right?
Yeah.
YouTubers and Twitch streamers do that quite well also.
Super parasocial. Yeah.
Right? Games are different. Games, you are taking the action. You have agency. So in a game like Life is Strange, where you are two kids on the run and you explore and you make decisions, at one point you have to steal food to survive, but it's ethically wrong to steal food. And it's an important and pivotal decision in the game. But you make that decision and you have the consequence of that decision. And that is where games are very unique and powerful.
That's awesome. Yeah. I feel like we could talk to you all night long, Matt.
Yes.
And I'm sitting here, I'm curious though. This is something we've started asking our guests. When you were a kid, who was that teacher, that mentor, that coach, someone that inspired you, whether it was for gaming or not, but to, you're a great educator and you're full of knowledge with all the game-based learning. So is there someone you'd love to shout out from growing up?
There was this teacher, Ms. Z, and she was she taught us our social studies classes. And so this is in the early 1980s. And she had a Commodore PET computer, which is
nice.
Novel, right?
Oh, yeah.
I was just seeing a computer, and this was like when Dungeons and Dragons first started and choose your own adventure books. Mm-hmm. And I took a lot of detours until I realized that could be an actual academic career. Right? When they say there's that expression, like, I don't know, it's actually a made up number, but they say like 80% of the jobs that kids have don't exist yet.
Yeah. Right.
And
I just told that to my students the other day. So it's okay.
Yeah. Right. And I guess this is one of them, right? Who knew, right? But awesome. I think, I don't know, I guess that idea of, and when I think back on these things, like I do reflect back on what I like to do in school, and it was definitely projects and project-based learning where you can make games and create stuff. I remember there was a game called Lemonade Stand, which was actually, from the same company or group that made Oregon Trail. It's kind of similar too in a way. And there was a video rental store, like VHS rentals, and it was in our town. It was like, wow, I can watch movies at home, And I made a version in BASIC, right? I coded a version of a video rental store that was basically a knockoff of Lemonade Stand.
Very cool.
And it was for fun.
Now you're speaking my language. That's
right.
Cool.
And that was for fun. Now, what I'm excited about when we talk about schools that do project-based learning is bringing those interests and passions into classrooms. That's where magic happens, right?
That's awesome. And Miss Z helped inspire that just from having the ginormous computer in the classroom. I know.
It had like that screen with only green letters.
Know it very well. Yep. We should all go watch War Games after this.
Yes. We should watch War Games. And that's set in Colorado Springs, not too far, a couple hours from here.
Very cool.
Really? I didn't remember that.
Yeah, that's where where NORAD is, which most people now know because of Christmas. And
that's right. Very cool.
Santa.
Well, this is the part where we, if it's okay with you, where we each kind of share a little inspiration that you've instilled in us or something you said that just is kind of sticking with us. So we're going to go around and do that. And you as our guest kind of get the last word or last thought of inspiration from the conversation tonight. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. Letitia, I'm going to let you go first and get Fred.
Oh, wow. Look at that. I go to the back of the class.
Are you like moonwalking back?
Watch it. Is your boot on, Fred?
Oh, he's getting loose. His boot is off.
Jeez.
I love it. Well, Matt, first I just want to thank you so much for sharing your thinking and your research with us. I mean, I felt like a student just listening and absorbing everything. I so appreciate your hard work and just exposing. And I do have a quote, but I also wanted to share, Matt, that your work inspired me today, because as a therapist, I learned about Sparks, the game that helps treat depression. And so, I got so excited that now I can bring that into my practice because I do virtual. So we'll be doing more Minecraft, and I'm going to look into this Spark. So thank you for inspiring me tonight. And I'll be bringing some gaming into my therapy session. So that'll be awesome.
There are a lot, if you look at takethis.org, by the way, that might lead you, because they're clinical psychologists there.
Okay.
And,
okay.
Takethis.org, and there are other resources. It probably is linked on the page somewhere, but I do know there are several therapists that use tabletop role-playing games in therapy also.
And
like
what was amazing? I know we're supposed to be sharing our quote, but I started using virtual sand trays, as play therapy. So there's virtual sand trays, and I was a little apprehensive at first to use it with adults. And the sessions were so rich that just interaction of creating, responding to a prompt, using that virtual game, really, sand tray was pretty enlightening. So super excited. But I think my quote for tonight is that the goal of education should be about human flourishing. I love that. I love that quote. And I feel like if we just, put down all of those inhibitions and that fear teachers sometimes have about incorporating something new and make the kids the focus and their fullness as a human being, maybe it will help us all. So thank you, sir. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
Nice. All right, Fred, you ready?
So hot. Yes. Yes, I am. Matt, you know what? I would love to talk to you after this and share some ideas, and I have some questions for you, and I am following your work. You brought to light some very cool stuff. And the first, so for everybody that's listening, and you're wondering about, let's say, gamification instead, like a little bit side tangent of this topic, but just do it. Just start. Don't worry about it being perfect. It's one of those things that it's always evolving too, right? But you do need to do some prep, and you do need to move forward with it. And to that end, the website that you just spoke of, I was not aware of, and now I am going to be going out to, and that's the Games of Change site. So gamesofchange.org, where there's a number of these. Which one?
Games for Change.
Games for Change. Yes, Games for Change. Yes, I'm sorry. Gamesforchange.org.
No.
Not of change, Fred. Come on.
Right.
Don't go there.
And it's on the website, Raising Good Gamers. That's the initiative.
Oh, that's cool. So these are great resources. We're going to get these out on to the post when we put this up there. But I think the takeaway for me was the reminder of balance. Whether you're a parent or whether you're a teacher or, you're involved in your school in some way, making sure that balance exists, because that's where, when we don't have that, that's when these other problems start to emerge. And that takes some responsibility. But I liked how you kind of put that all together through, through the lens of history in a sense, but ultimately creating that balance and ensuring it. Because I think a lot of times, I think we still deal with a parent population that looks at technology as a little bit mystical, as a big unknown, because maybe they didn't play games growing up or video games. Maybe they didn't get that experience, and now they're seeing their kids do more of this. So the best thing is to join in with them, right? To try to experience it with them in some way and see if you can help them achieve that balance, as opposed to letting them go off on a tangent. Because I think we all know of a certain superstar who's very much in front of the media, who found out through her child who was playing Minecraft that there was some very bad activities going on in Minecraft. and that mother didn't know about what was going on in Minecraft. And this is somebody who has plenty of money and time that you would think would have known, but she didn't. So I could name the name. I don't think it's appropriate if we should name it, but anyway, I like the resources and the reminder of balance.
I just want to say something on that. I've done some work with Sesame Workshop, and what they do is Joan Gans Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop, and their work goes back in the 1970s to this concept of co-viewing. So parents should not just consider educational television the teacher, but to ask questions, right? And what do you think is going to happen, and what does that remind you of, and retell and that sort of thing. And they've expanded that language to be called joint media engagement in 2011, and that's what we should be doing more of. So that means ebooks, video games, television, Twitch streamers, everything.
Good. Yeah, that's a great reminder. Thank you.
All right, Pete.
Yeah, so what a great conversation tonight. So much. It brought back some memories during the shutdown. My son at the time, 4th and 5th grade, if it weren't for gaming, I don't know, these kids needed something to do together. And they were in the room right next door, and I heard all their voices, and they were playing games together, all at the same time. And everybody was in their own homes. And I just said, what a gift, what a blessing this technology is right now. And in many ways, there were arguments. It was 50-50 boy, girl. There were arguments, and there were problem solvings. There was growth. There was competition. There was disappointment. There was when things don't work, figuring out different way to go. And I was really okay with it. Again, balanced. It was sort of like the recess time, lunchroom time, and the bus ride all in one. Was it as good as real life? Probably not, but it was something. I was very, very thankful that they had that. Fast forward to this week, I took those same kids out shopping. They're in middle school now. And we walked up to the Apple booth in a store, and they pulled up an iPad that's on demonstration mode, and they started playing this game. It was called Never Alone, from 2014, and it was beautiful. The artwork, the storytelling. It's about explore Native Alaskan stories as a young girl in this new video game. Never Alone draws out the art, stories, and culture of Alaskan Inuit, and it was brought on by the tribal council in Alaska that partnered with a software company. But the storytelling in it, and it was about this beautiful young girl and her fox in the snow. And I was mesmerized by this game as they were playing it. So on the way home, I continued it. And in the car on the drive home, I wanted to make up the backstory and what happens after we play. And we just talked and brainstormed, and it was so cool. All of us, like you said, around a campfire of sorts, talking and going to the next level, being inspired by this media, by this activity. So that was very, very cool. Thank you for joining us tonight. My takeaway was right from the beginning. It's the umbrella thing that just covers it all. Anytime an educator brings play into the classroom is a win. I live that every day, and I believe it 100%. So that was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting you bring up Never Alone, and I've done some work and research on it, and I know some of the folks that were behind making it. And it is like one of the first games to tell an indigenous story, and that is a Cook Inlet folktale.
Right. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah, they wanted to share their culture in a medium that's going to reach the most people, right? And you can use it with a paired text, right? You can pair it with there are several books, fiction and nonfiction.
Right.
As well. What's interesting also in that game, a couple of things, is as you play the game, you unlock video clips. And the video clips are actually documentary clips of the people in Cook Inlet who explain what their life is like, traditionally.
That's brilliant.
And you can play in 2-player mode as the fox and the young girl, Nuna. And you must work together to survive. And I played it together with my son years ago. Like you said, it came out in 2014. It was recently awarded a Peabody Award. So the Peabody Awards, I think awards, by the way, just like how graphic novels have won awards, I think the Peabody Award for games and interactives is going to elevate the media. But my son and I played this years ago, and the game also is a multimodal text. So it really takes their stories and puts it into like in mechanics. Like the Aurora Borealis is something
It's beautiful,
right? And he remembers the game. If I read him a book 5 years ago about, about the Cook Inlet people in Alaska, I don't think he would remember it. But there's something about the experiential play of a game that sticks with you longer term.
Very cool. Thank you.
It's something about that. It's that immersive aspect to it.
Right, right.
And I think it's role playing too, a little bit.
It definitely is. And, it's also, it's just not as, it's definitely that role play and you're in it, right? You feel like you're part of that experience.
Yep.
Yeah, Disney talks about plussing up things, and I feel like tonight that's what you did for me, Matt, because in an English classroom, whenever you're reading books, I would always try to tie in poetry, paintings from that time period, anything, songs that could let them kind of think about what was happening at that time, looking at the history. We would do like gallery walks, looking at the paintings, and even I'd have them just make up the stories. What's happening here? What's this person doing here? Where are they? What's the setting? And I feel like adding a game to it, especially if it fits, the genre, the story, the theme, is just like plussing it up, because you really are immersing them into it. So my quote was the same as Pete. If we have us all playing in the classroom, then it's a big win. So I love this idea of play theory. I'm so thankful you're able to come and talk to us. Can you tell us where people can find you, and also make sure to mention at least your newest book that came out?
Oh, yeah. So you can find me online. It's my full name.com, Matthew Farber, the 2 T's, MatthewFarber.com. And on Twitter, it's at Matthew Farber. I was an early adopter. Got my name. It's not at real Matthew Farber.
Oh, it was still 120 characters.
Yeah, right. My book is Gaming SEL, Games as Transformational to Social and Emotional Learning.
Great.
Which is on Amazon and everywhere else.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Pete, where can people find us?
Join our Facebook group, Teachers Pep Rally. We're on Instagram now. Our episodes are on YouTube, and wherever you're listening to us tonight, please leave us a review and let's keep the conversation going.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
And thank you, Matt, for coming. I'm going to go play Pac-Man, I think, after this.
Go
I
for
found
it.
a whole bunch of new games I'm going to be downloading right now. So.